Dawn had not yet decided on the shape of the day when the wind turned. It came about like a man who had been arguing the evening before and now, without apology, took the other side. The Black Betha heeled, her old timbers creaking in a language Davos Seaworth could read better than ink on parchment. The smell that rose was tar and pine and salt tired from long duty, and under it the faint metallic breath of the river they were steering toward. He planted his boots wider, the nail of his little toe pressing against shoe leather. He'd mended himself on the voyage, and he felt, close as a whisper, the pull of the city ahead. Even without sight of the walls, he knew where King's Landing lay. The air itself grew heavier, loaded with coal smoke and cooking fat and the human steam that a great city gives off at night like the breath of a sleeping beast. Mathos stood beside him, younger eyes searching the gloom as if their will could erase it. "We'll be early," the boy said, and the word carried both triumph and fear. He was not a child anymore, though Davos's heart clung to the memory of a boy with a skinned knee and a stubborn tilt to his mouth. That mouth now held prayers. It shaped the lean syllables of a new god's name when cold touched him or doubt, and Davos had learned to listen to that too, without arguing as he once would. "I," Davos said, letting the wind brush his cropped hair and counting, as he always did, the stumps beneath his glove. It was not a penance he merely bore. It was an accounting, and tonight the sum felt different. The tide tricks men who don't know her. We're in her good book this morning. He did not say the other truth, which was that the previous night's storm had pushed them quicker and truer than any oars. Lightning had cracked out beyond the headlands, a jagged teeth-baring, and then the rain had come off the sea in a sheet that smoothed the water and made it dark as boiled leather. Half the fleet had thought to shorten sail. Ser Imry Florent had hesitated, looking to the glitter on his knuckles, weighing the storm's mind. Stannis, aboard Fury, had not hesitated. Davos had seen the lantern swinging on the flagship's stern, seen it sweep left and then draw a straight line, and in that unbending line he recognized the man. "Signal from Fury," called Cobb, the Betha's mate, not raising his voice more than needed. The men were quiet by habit when the dark was close. "Maintain distance. No lights." Davos made a sound in his throat that might have been a scent. He lifted his spyglass. No glass at all was any good in this light, but the gesture calmed him. He saw shapes without meaning. Black on black, the suggestion of sails like folded hands, the white lick of foam when a bow rose. Under it, the river's voice deepened. The sea made one kind of talk, the open vowel of a thing with no walls. The river had consonants, edges, a cadence learned at night long ago when Davos ran onions through the Red Keep's shadow and learned the city's other mouth, the one that ate men and left their bones. Mathos leaned closer, a warmth Davos felt even through the river's cold, and this time the boy did not whisper the Red Priestess's words. He said, "Are you thinking of the chain people talk of, father?" "The chain people talk of is a story to make boys piss their beds," Davos said, more gruff than the question deserved, because he had counted the danger of a chain since he'd first heard Tyrion Lannister had an engineer's curiosity. He could picture it. Iron links swollen with rust like a beggar's tears, hidden beneath the water, waiting for some desperate order. Another man would have taken comfort from the storm's haste. Davos counted the ways it might have also aided the enemy. "The chain I'm thinking of is the kind you don't see till it's closed around your throat." Mathos took that with a sober little nod that made him look like his mother in one of her moods. "The Lord's hand raised the storm," he said, as if offering a blanket. "It brought us to judgment sooner." Davos did not argue gods. The Red Woman had a look that knew arguments before they traveled the mouth. He stared instead at the eastern sky, where a smudge lighter than ink signaled morning's thumb. "When judgment comes, if one man speaks your name and another mine, I hope we know whose tongue we should prize," he said, and he meant Stannis, though it was easier to talk about anything else than the man's eyes. Tension ran through the fleet like a wire under cloth. Men moved with the ginger economy of those who had already bent their minds around fear and chosen their tasks in spite of it. There were no fires aboard the ships, only banked lamps wrapped in cloth so their light breathed like an old man and died quickly. Oars were shipped. There were no drums to call the stroke. The Betha crept on the wind, her stern stubborn and her bow keen, and Davos thought, as he often did, that she had been many things and survived them all. Smuggler's luck and gallows rope, king's levy and boy's boast. He patted her rail once with his knuckles, a kindness for both of them. On Fury, Stannis Baratheon stood as he always stood, planted like a spar sunk into a reef, unwilling to move because the ocean moved around him. The deck pitched and rolled with the river's mood, and he took it like any small injustice, with a tightening around the mouth that was almost a muscle's protest. He had spared no thought for sleep, and the light beard that shadowed his jaw was the same color as iron that had seen rain. He kept his hands behind his back because he would not grip the rail. He would not give the wood that intimacy. A lantern rattled near his shoulder. Melisandre did not hold it. She would not. The night feared her more than she feared it, but a boy did, one of the nameless turns on a ship who do the quiet work that keeps men from drowning. The lantern's cloth smoked in the damp, and the smoke found Stannis's nose with the Persis. Tense of a bad counsel, he did not look at the woman. He felt her the way one feels a fire when one has already taken one step too close. "We are early," she said, with that tone that turned fact into omen. "The tide is our friend." "The tide serves no friend," Stannis said, his voice hoarse ned by the wind as if disuse had been sand. "It turns on its hour. That we make use of it is the whole of triumph." He did not look at her, but he let her hear him. "Do you see the walls? I see men who think walls will forgive them," she said, and turned her face toward the city as if listening to voices in the stone. "I see a boy on a throne and a mother who has never known fear, which is the same as never having known sense. I see a small man with a large mind that is, just now, elsewhere. And I see, my king, a gate that never should have been left as it is. Men will make your path because they cannot imagine you arriving where you have not been invited." Stannis almost smiled. It was like the sun in winter. If one did not know to look for it, one would not have seen it. "You talk as if you've never seen a guard fall asleep at his post and a cook steal a better cut," he said. "Men imagine everything if you give them the hour." He turned his head, the lantern's dull light finding the scar that scored his temple, a white memory above his left eye. "But the hour is ours." She dipped her head, a motion he had learned meant yes. The god she served made motion heat. She made certainty. He had come to rely on that even when it sickened him. He imagined, sometimes, the taste of a life without doubt and found it bland in the mouth. "Send to Ser Imri," he said, and a boy went to the trumpet with his message and returned without lingering. "Order the knights to be ready at the oars. I want the first boats on the bank the moment we clear. Signal Seaworth to lead the line. No fire until we are under their shadow. If their walls wake, I want them to wake to teeth at their gate." He could feel, even without turning, the small knot of servants that came with Melisandre. Men who said no songs and yet moved like they were singing. They were part of his household indeed, if not name. Swallows nesting in the rafters of a house that had been built by a different hand. He felt their eyes the way he felt most eyes. A push he set his weight against. "Fire will come," the Red Woman murmured, and it was not a threat. "But for now, yes, shadows do better. The only shadow I trust is the one I throw," Stannis said, and the wind called up the smell again. That great, living smell of people. He had never liked it. The sea's simplicity had suited him. A man and a duty and water that fit only into the shape of its vessel. Cities bled you of straight answers. They worked on you like vinegar on iron. In the city, the night had that late-hour quiet that is not quiet at all. It belonged not to innocent sleep but to those who waited. Mothers with sick children, gamblers with dice under their blankets for luck, the women who made money correctly and those who made it crooked, and the men in the gold cloaks who sat on stools with their spears across their knees and hated the weight of their helmets because it dragged their necks like a yoke. King's Landing had many bellies, and only one of them was full. The rest made their complaints in the dark, a chorus no lord had ever managed to silence. Tyrion Lannister lay awake staring at the canopy of a bed that was not his, pillows in a quantity he mistrusted under his shoulders, and knew he had, for the second time that week, miscounted the days. Haleen the pyromancer had talked of yellow crystals and green pots with the gravity of a man ordering numbers in a ledger, and Tyrion had let himself believe in an artisan's predictability. But men were not kills, and they did not burn at one heat. The wildfire vats gurgled like indigestion. The chain in the vintner's wharf still had a section of links bright enough to blind in morning light. No matter what he had done, the city's belly had gurgled back at him, amused. He swung his legs out of the bed. It was not his bed. He had given Shay a slice of the lion's tower with windows high enough to look out and be invisible doing it, and sometimes he pretended that made the place a refuge instead of a test. He was not good at pretending when his heart beat as if it had a rabbit inside it. He found his boots by touch and reached for the scarlet doublet because there was irony in the color and he had always liked his jokes like that, worn inside the coat. Varys had told him, with that oily pleasantness that never quite stuck to the man himself, that gulls flew at odd hours 2 nights past. That was the sort of news the master of whisperers loved to offer. Fishy, slightly rank, endlessly interpretive. Tyrion wondered now if the birds had been right where he and his plans had been wrong. He walked to the window and set his palm on the stone, which was cool as if the city had recently exhaled and stolen its heat back. He imagined the mouth of the river as he had seen it as a boy from a boat with more sailors than sense. A wide jaw opening on teeth of unrepaired piers and ropes that grew mold in the damp. He imagined, because it had been forced into him, the wedge of a fleet sliding like a blade between those teeth, the oars dipped in the black. He imagined, also because he must, his sister's mouth when he told her they were early. He must do that now, before a trumpet did it for him and gave her the pleasure of surprise. On his way through the corridor, he met Sandor Clegane leaning against a window embrasure, looking at the blue that was not yet day. The hound had the same air he always wore, a dog at the end of a chain that it had to be reminded of, a tremendous strength that looked more like boredom than rest. He regarded Tyrion without interest and then with a slant that was almost curiosity. "Up with the ghosts, imp?" Sandor asked. He had a way of making words cut women's stockings and men's boasts both. "Or did some whore kick you out of bed early?" Tyrion had a reply for the second part of that remark that he had used in 100 different ways and turned toward the first instead. A little of column A, a lot of column B, and a rumor on the wind besides. "How many men at the mud gate?" "Not enough," Sandor said, which was probably true no matter the number. But his voice had a slight shift that made Tyrion's stomach acknowledge it like a punch. "The Night Watch plays knucklebones if they can cheat at it." "Why?" "Because ships are quieter before dawn," Tyrion said, and he liked that his voice did not shake. It was an old trick, and his tongue knew it the way other men's hands knew sword hilts. Sandor pushed off the stone and looked down toward the river as if his eyes could shrug off dark like a cloak and see. "If Stannis comes early," he said, with the sort of resignation men give chores, "we get to bleed sooner. Better than waiting." Tyrion wanted to like that. He wanted to seize it as truth and armor both. But he had looked on melting green the day before, watched as a droplet had slid across stone and hissed as it sank, and his mind had formed pictures faster than he could swallow. He could trust a fall of masonry. He could gamble with a man's greed. He revered an engineer's neat cruelty. Fire, though, made children of men. It made them remember their hands were meat. He left Sandor and went toward the sept where Cersei had taken to sleeping some nights when fear and wine together made her devout. He found her not with candles but in her solar, the windows gaping and the room cold with night, a goblet offset in her hand. She wore a dressing gown of pale silk, not white, which she would not invite, and her hair was loose like some court painter's notion of a queen. He waited while she made him. He had learned with her that if he entered her line of sight unannounced, the first word went to her shock, and he could not afford her feeling anything before he spoke. "You look like you're about to say we have a great triumph," Cersei said, her lip curling slightly because the words themselves offended her with their optimism. "Go on. I don't sleep much, and I enjoy your little plays." "We have the opposite," Tyrion said. "Stannis is at the river before we had meant him to be." Her mouth did not move at first. Her eyes did. She looked toward the window as if the city were a dog that might be called. Helene said his pots. Helene has said many things. Tyrion cut in softly. He has also told me that a warmer night would have helped the mix, that the last batch had impurities that require time, that the apprentices cough too much because of the vapors and will work better after they are given rest. I have an artist who wants to be a wife. She narrowed her eyes, some part of her working like small gears in a watch. So you come to me with nothing. I come to you with men and a wall and a city that will be asked what it is made of sooner rather than later, Tyrion said. I come to you with Sandor Clegane and the gold cloaks who have their reasons and Bronn who has no reason but coin. I come to you with a suggestion to keep Joffrey off the walls at first. Let him be seen at a distance so he looks large. She smiled with contempt, then, but not at the idea. You would have him hide. He won't, and I won't have him look meek. You want him killed, then? Tyrion asked, too gently to be forgiven. Shall we find a spear a foot longer than his courage and fix him to it? She slapped the arm of her chair, the sound crisp enough to snap a fly's wing. You are tiresome. Do as you like with your men and your walls. The boy will show himself. These people need to be reminded what it is they live under. He thought of roofs and sky and bread and thought they might be living under other things than her son. But he nodded because the knight had no patience for the argument they would have if he did not. Very good. In the meantime, I will go and be what I am. Pray to whatever you think listens that when I come back, it has not been wasted. She drank, long and without appreciation, and then turned her face away as if she were not in the room anymore. Tyrion left her, because whatever she spoke to in her head would not include him. The bells did not ring. That was the worst of it. Alarm had a ceremony, and this morning they were denied it. Instead, the city heard, first down by the wharves where the knight kept its coins, then up in the crooked lanes, oars touching water. The sound is small when it is only one boat and becomes a sound in the way rain is a sound when it is many. It made people stop with spoons in hand and turn, as if a friend had called from the street. Then it made them lock doors. Davos's men took the oars with the speed of those who had lived long lives on the sea in short years. He felt the Betha quicken, a woman glad of the attention. The mouth of the river opened before them, darker than the sea by some trick of depth, and the air changed. You could smell mud. You could smell what had floated and settled and lived and died in a city that opened all its veins into this water. On good days, it was a food smell, honest as onions and fish. On bad days, it was a smell with a thin rotted in that Davos had learned to measure like money. This morning, it was a smell of expectation. The city breathed out. He breathed in, and his lungs asked him a question he could not answer. A light winked from fury. Davos shaded his eyes out of habit, though the light was a thought more than a thing. Bring her in, he said. No signal fire. No voice unless a man is about to die. Mathos touched his father's arm, apology already in his face because he spoke against an order. The men will want. They'll want to tell their mothers, and they'll do it with a blade, Davos said, not unkindly. You pray for them. I'll steer. Into sin. The Betha slid along the shadow of the wall. It had, Davos noted, a seam in it he did not remember. A patch where the stone had been repaired and the mortar had spread like bread dough, a long pale tongue. He marked it, not with any notion of later use but because that was what his mind did. Took a ledger of defects in a world that promised justice and paid short. They passed under the skeleton of some builder's project. A crane or a hoist that had been meant to lift and then forgotten, and men lay under it asleep with towers of empty barrels like a citizenry around a lord. One woke and sat up, peering, and his confusion went across his face like clouds over a hill. Davos's men drew breath and held it without anyone telling them to. The man blinked. He coughed. He lay down again with that careful, guilty tenderness of a man who tells himself he had not seen what he has seen. Davos kept the Betha's bow pointed at the low shingle of bank that would take a keel. He did not look to left or right because the man who drives a wedge through wood does not consider the grain's protest. He thinks only of the cut. Behind him, other ships ghosted in a line so straight you could have strung a plum from it. You could tell the ones with highborn aboard by the nerves in the air around them. Davos knew the poor man's quiet better than the Lord's. Stannis had put men he trusted in front like weights at the tip of a spear, and in that trust was a demand. The first cry came like an accident. A man whose foot had met another man's foot in the dark. Then the city found its alarm. Not a bell but a flare of torches along a parapet and a horn blown with the desperate imprecision of a boy given a task too old for him. The Betha kissed the bank with a heavy, involuntary tenderness that made the hull shudder and then settled. Davos dropped his arm, and the gangplank went down with the slap of wood on mud. Men in mailed shirts and boiled leather went across it as if down a good road, some touching the plank as they went because wood can be a friend. Davos went last of the first, not because he was afraid but because he would be the last to be a fool. His boots sank, the river claiming him up to the ankle, and he lifted his foot with that slow pull a man makes when he is leaving anything he loves. The bank rose and became a lane that was less a lane than a habit of men. It smelled of rotting nets and old straw, and rats ran like thoughts when the mind is afraid to be alone. Houses leaned together over it as if they had secrets in their roof beams that they could not wait to whisper to their neighbors' gables. Davos knew this place in the way men know their first sin and their first kindness both. Stairs took them up between buildings and turned right and left in a pattern he could have walked blind. He had done worse than this for less excuse. They met the first gold cloaks at a corner where a tavern, Judith's or Jory's, he could not quite say which, had a lantern out front with the wick turned down to a weak blue. The men had not expected visitors from this direction and at this hour, and they had made oaths to their dice rather than to any god before being summoned. In the confusion, a man stepped forward with authority in him and raised a hand, not yet a sword. "What's this?" he asked, and Davos could not help it. He remembered being asked that by men who had thought to scare him and then had gone home with onions. "What's this is the king's justice," said the knight at Davos's right. A man with a fox face and a family name that fell apart in Davos's head every time he looked at it. He lifted his sword with gentleness, as if it were a thing to be persuaded into use rather than thrown. "Lay down your spears." They did not, and then men became the creatures they are when the talk runs out. Davos pushed his body into the line and felt the dull thumping excitement that came to him always in the first heartbeat of a fight. Not joy, not fear, but a sharpening, the world's edges newly drawn. He parried because he had a sword, and he pushed because he had shoulders, and he did not kill because he did not have to. The gold cloaks fell back under the weight of the expectation in Stannis's men, more than under their blades. Expectation was its own weapon. Men had always surrendered to it. "Forward," Davos said, and the word did not feel like his and was, all the same. The lane opened into a wider alley, and he could see, at its far end, the suggestion of water again where the river looped in a foolish way that only rivers and girls do. He had meant to go left toward a known stair that climbed a portion of wall where men grew bored, but the fight had pressed them right. And now he caught a slice of the city he knew worse, the court where the fishwives spread their wares in summer and swore like priests in winter, the door of a warehouse whose lintel had been carved with a pattern of vines by a man who cared. A shutter above them swung open with a reckless confidence, and a woman thrust out her head and then more of herself, unconcerned with the cold or the eyes that would always look. "They say it's Stannis," she called to someone in the room behind her. And then, less to them than to the air, "They finally come to do something about it." Davos felt the words lodge against his ribs, strange and heavy. He did not have the habit of thinking what people believed. He had learned to mind what men did, and there was enough of that now to occupy him. A boy ran across the alley with a basket and stopped, breathing with his mouth open, and looked at Davos as if trying to decide whether this was a dream that would make him ashamed later. Mathos came up beside him, cheeks bright with cold and ardor both. "We are in," he said, as if he had just climbed from darkness into air. "Father, look." Davos looked. The city was not one thing to look at, but many small things stitched together. Here a shutter, open. There a door, locked. Here a man in a nightshirt, scowling as if it were rain that had been promised and he'd been cheated. There a hawker with yesterday's oranges shriveling on his cart. Above it all, the walls, patient and blind, waiting for men to decide whether they were to be ladders or tombstones. He saw, in the near distance, the mud gate. It sat in the wall like a tooth that had been cracked and repaired, its arch healed but tender. There were men on the parapet, confused and then not. Their voices became the city's voice, and then there was a new sound. The ring of skirling iron as someone finally took a bell rope and hauled on it, and the bell, roused and affronted, found its brass and shouted. On the river, more ships came, dark shapes becoming intentions. Fury's lantern burned a signal to another ship that had edged out too far. The sound of oars came in layers, now loud, now swallowed by the walls. Davos's men moved to the gate as if a story had told them to. He kept the Betha's complement together because he could not bear to see them scattered like grain to birds in the first hour. On the far side of the wall, inside the gatehouse, a boy of 17 who had been given a spear because his uncle had died and no one else had wanted the post tried to figure out which rope to pull. There were 4, because the gate had been designed for ceremony as much as defense. The image of a thing gripping 2 doors and lifting them apart with majesty. He tugged one, nothing happened, and his superior hit him on the back of the head. He pulled another, and this time the right chain snarled. "Faster, fool," the man said. The chain had no understanding of urgency. It moved at the speed iron moves when drawn up through a space it does not fit. Tyrion reached the base of the wall with his boots wet and a half-dozen guards around him whose loyalty was measured in the weight of the coin pouch he had thrown at the last dice game. The bell was complaining now across the rooftops. Others answered it with the laziness that comes when news is still a rumor. "Up," Tyrion said to the captain of the gate. "Up, you fat sow's son. Find me a bowman who has kissed a bow before today. Find me 3. Sandor Clegane was already there, because he had the sense of a dog that knows where trouble will produce meat. He mounted the stair as if climbing a dune he had no opinion about. He looked down at the wedge of men pressing the outer face of the gate, at the ship with the black onion on its sail that had come in like a secret and was now as bold as a king. He spat over the parapet and watched his spit swing back in a small arc because the wind had turned. "They'll be at your feet by breakfast," he said to no one in particular, which was the closest he came to humor. "Then we should keep our shoes on," Tyrion said, and he took a bow he had no hope of drawing and passed it to a man who could. "Aim for the ones giving orders. Aim for the one who looks like he hates what he must do. Them's all of them," the archer said, and he raised the bow and loosed, and a man below threw up his hands with a surprised delicacy and sat down. Another arrow made a clever sound finding metal and sang away, disappointed. Davos felt an arrow pass near his ear, a little flick like a bee, and then another. "Shields," he said, and boys he had seen grow into their beards got behind wood and iron as if they'd been bred to it. A rock came down from the wall, a lazy parody of a boulder, and broke against a cart in a surprise of splinters. The sound was like a laugh. "Forward," Davos said, and the word seemed to move men's feet more than any drum could have. A knight he did not know well, Gauntlet, with a device on his shield that might have been a stag or a goat for all the light gave them, put his shoulder to the gate. "Ram," he said, and a ram was conjured from the air not by magic but by the foresight of practical men. It was a carved ship's spar, lifted by 6 men who had known it when it was a mast. They swung it with the clumsy grace of a new dance and hit the gate at the place where it meets iron and both remember the tree, or it used to be. Inside, the chain creaked, and the boy pulled, and the superior swore, and then something gave that no one expected to give. It was a pin, and it had been bent too many times in drills men had not enjoyed, and it decided this was no longer its hour. One of the great gate leaves shuddered and sagged, caught itself, and stopped. The room filled with the new sound of men believing there was a way to ruin easily at hand. "Prop it," Tyrion said, his voice very calm, and men brought a beam and made it do as if they had always meant this. "Boiling oil?" Sandor asked, the way one asks a man if he has remembered his cloak on a cold day. "Pitch," Tyrion said. The stores were what they were. The city had too many throats, and all had been hungry for too long. He watched as a man with a face burned in some old kitchen accident brought up a pot with his hands in rags and lifted it with a tenderness a husband might envy. He poured it down through a murder hole, and below, someone's scream changed key. Tyrion closed his eyes for the time it took to breathe once, because he was a man who calculated, and this was not numbers. The first ladder came up like a question asked too many times. It hooked the lip of the parapet and wobbled there, indecisive, until a hand reached up and steadied it from below, and then another hand reached for that hand and cut the fingers off. Fingers made a particular sound when they fell. Tyrion had not known that. Sandor's sword moved. Tyrion did not watch it. He found, instead, the sight of a man below with a shaved head and a scar that cut through his eyebrow like a poorly drawn river. The man held a line of men in formation the way a tailor holds a stitch, not with force so much as with, simply, a habit. He shouted, and those near him believed that shouting mattered. "That on. Tyrion said to the archer, and the man bent his bow and loosed, and the arrow walked across the crowd and made the scarred man stagger. He did not fall. He stood with an irritating reliability and shouted again. Davos did not know when Mathos came to stand at his shoulder, only that his son's presence drew his attention like a hand to a wound you had forgotten. The boy's face was altered by the light and by an emotion Davos hoped was not simple zeal. "They are pouring pitch," Mathos said, as if naming a bird. "Aye," Davos said, and then, because he was a father once before he was anything else, "Keep your shield high and close. If it comes, it finds the first gap." Mathos nodded and lifted the shield so that his cheek pressed against the rim, his skin taking on a smear of mud from someone else's use of the wood. He had his mother's lashes. Davos wanted very much, more than he wanted the gate or the wall or the fresh title they had promised if the world turned as Stannis meant it to see those lashes tomorrow. "Push," Davos said, and the ram swung again, and the gate took it and said so in its grain. On the wall's far side, in a chamber where candles had burned to stubs and the air had become thick with the smell of lime and vinegar used to cut the other smell, Haleen the pyromancer stared at a jar that had not cooled as it should. He had sent word to the hand that more would be ready at first light. He had not told him that what was ready would behave as it liked if handled gently, and as it liked differently if handled with want of care. He had watched, earlier, as a junior had wiped at a spill with a damp rag and then wrung the rag out over a gutter and learned something that made him very still for a long time. He had told the boy to clean with dry sand and to be slow. The boy had nodded with respect and then forgotten in fear. Haleen had belonged to the guild long enough to know the difference between knowledge and habit. He thought now of his oath and the naked feeling that came when he imagined breaking it because the city required him to. He was not a brave man. He was, at his very best, precise. Varys appeared at the door of that room like a ghost who had been invited. "Master Haleen," he murmured, making the title a compensation for the hour. "The hand asks that you prepare to move the vessels if he sends for them." "I cannot move what will not be moved," Haleen said, and he meant the truth and wished he could, for once, improve upon it with politeness. "If your lions had given me 2 more nights, I would have been able to promise." Varys lifted a hand that turned the complaint away without offense. "No one will have what they wanted," he said mildly. "The trick now is to make do with what we have and to pretend that was the plan. Can you, with your art, make a small demonstration along the wall if the hand asks you to?" "Along the wall?" Haleen repeated, and his mind made pictures and then revised them. "It would take time and men and the gods' patience." "The gods are busy," Varys said. "Take men, then." Stannis, on Fury's poop deck, watched as the line of his ships made their way in without breaking. There was beauty in it, the beauty of numbers. "Signal to Florent," he said. "Drive the center line forward. Send the lighter craft to the far bank. We'll press both sides of the gate. If we let them concentrate on one point, we deserve what we get." A boy in a red cloak ran, and a horn blew, and men altered the angle of their oars without talk, because this was what he liked in them. He had always loved obedience when it came with competence. He hated it when men obeyed him stupidly. He hated stupid obedience more than defiance. He looked once toward the stern where Melisandre stood like a black flame and thought, the way one thinks in passing of an old cut, of the thing she had given him on the island. had drawn from him and made into something that had moved in the dark like the idea of a knife. He did not like the memory. He did not ask it for its use. Today would have men and iron. Today would have him. "An arrow from the wall, your grace," called a sailor, and Stannis turned his head not to avoid the arrow but to mark its source. He did not duck. He despised the motion in himself. The arrow struck the rail a pace from his hand and stuck there, quivering like a thought that had come late to a conversation. He regarded it and lifted it with 2 fingers and passed it to the sailor. "Best return it," he said, and the man grinned like a boy and raised his bow. Stannis looked away because the boy would miss, and it would annoy him. The ram below struck again. The gate groaned, a sound from deep in its throat, and someone inside shouted, "Wedges!" as if they could hold the sea with wood. Oil came, and then sifted sand poured after it, and the mixture made a paste that turned men's hands into ovens. Davos's shield took a splash and smoked, and he raised it higher, feeling the heat through long use and callous and the cleverness of his glovemaker. A young knight to his left went to his knees without ceremony and then lay down without sense. Davos hooked his arm under the man's shoulder and dragged him back 2 steps so the next wave would not crush his head against the wood. The young man's breath came in small, astonished sounds, like a child who had been turned abruptly in his sleep. "We can't take her like this," said the fox-faced knight. "We need a tower or—" "We have ladders," Davos said. He did not like ladders on principle. They put a man between 2 worlds, belonged to neither, made him easy to cut down. But the hours would not fashion better. Up and over. When they look down, the ram goes again. Men obeyed because a man's certainty is a blessed thing in the dark. Ladders went up like prayers, and some were answered and some were not. Sandor met a man at the top of one and judged, in a heartbeat, that the man's sword would be in the wrong place. To guard his left knee and put his own blade there first. He did it like one taking a step. He hated fights that asked him to think about the fire in his head. These were good fights. He stood with his feet the width of his shoulders and let men come and go while he did the work he was made for. Tyrion's hands began to shake, which annoyed him, because the rest of him had the decency to behave. He clasped them behind his back as Stannis did not because, unlike Stannis, he was allowed small dishonesties and still be himself. He watched a ladder rear and then go back as a mass, men riding it down like a poorly chosen horse, and for a moment he grinned helplessly, because the sight had always been funny to him in a way he could not explain. Then the ladder to the right found purchase and stayed, and a man in a crescent-marked surcoat came up it with his head low and his shield high and left the edge like water spilling from a basin and became a problem on his walkway. Tyrion stabbed him with a pike he had someone hand him, and the man died because someone had to, and the thought made Tyrion sad and very angry at the same time. At the sept of the mother, Sansa Stark knelt on a cushion that had been embroidered by hands that would never see war and prayed as she had been taught. The words did not displease her. They were old friends who came when called, and they did not demand that she believe in their power, only that she speak to them as if reality would listen. It was like talking to a kind aunt. She asked that men would not bleed, and when the thought came that men would, she asked that those who bled be the least cruel ones and not the best. She did not add the boy king's name in either category. He existed in her mind at that moment not as a person but as a condition like rain. She watched, through the smoke of candles, the statue of the mother with her open arms, and out of nowhere she remembered a story old Nan had told her once about a woman who had raised her arms not to beg heaven but to lift a child, and how there was a different strength in that motion. A septa nearby whispered, "One more psalm." Her voice trembled not because of fear for herself but because she, too, had learned to think of the city as a child. Sansa wondered if the mother could hold a thing that large. She pressed her lips together because she wanted badly to cry for her father, and she had learned these last weeks that every cry must pay a price. She wiped her eyes with a careful sleeve that would not leave salt marks and began again. "Gentle hands hold." In the Red Keep's courtyard, men made a display because they had to, and because a populace believes what it sees with its eyes better than what it hears in great words. Joffrey stood on a platform that had been assembled yesterday because Cersei had demanded that he be visible. He wore a crown that seemed to sit on him like a chair he was too small for. His pale hair made the metal brighter, and sunlight, pale, reluctant, coming on as if it did not approve of the terms, caught at the edges and made little wedding rings around it. He held a crossbow, and his finger twitched near the trigger in a way that made the men near him watch his hands as if he were a nervous god. Cersei stood near, upright and calm, wearing her power like a scent. She watched the yard with a look that said she did not accept any of it and would punish it for existing. Lancel Lannister, who had the misfortune of being both young and handsome in a world that hated men who were not serious about either, tried to make his face grave and only managed pious. He kept glancing toward the city gate, which made the movement of his throat obvious. "Your Grace," he said to Joffrey, because that was safer than speaking to Cersei. "Shall we ride to the walls and be seen?" Joffrey looked at him as if he had suggested they fish. "Why would I go to the walls? That's for men. They can say I was there." His lip curled toward his mother's line without him knowing it. "We'll go to the gatehouse later and look at what we have won." Cersei's eyes did not move from some point in the air beyond the boy. "You will be seen soon enough," she said delicately, as if the phrase covered a multitude of outcomes. "For now, we let the imp do what he was unfortunately born to. Once he preserves us, we'll decide what he deserves." She smiled a little and then let the smile die of loneliness. Back at the wall, the fight developed into something less like a line and more like a rash. It broke out in patches, each a small fever with its own lesson. Davos's men took a corner of parapet and were then pushed off it when boiling water, not oil, not pitch, they had heated in panic and reliance on Housewives' Council, came down and turned the stone into a place where feet would not obey. Sandor drove a group of Stormlands men down a stair and then found himself on the landing in a space that smelled of damp rope, and fire flashed in his memory and turned the stair into a chimney in his mind. He froze for the length of a cough and then, with a rage that was quiet as a planned murder, moved again, his teeth set. Tyrion dragged a wounded man back by the collar and discovered that when one does that with small arms and weaker hands, there is a surprising pride that has nothing to do with strength and everything to do with having done what one did not believe possible. There were no green fires. There was the ordinary fire of tar and candle and men's breath, and the city held it, and the river did not. Men bled and did not burst. The water remained itself, brown and persuasive. The chain stayed in its pit, its shining links coiled like a promise postponed. The lack of the planned theater altered everything. The battle had not yet become a story. It was work. Stannis felt that like a bomb. He hated spectacle. He loved the advance of a plan that a man could count like steps. He watched as a group of his men forced a sally port. Near the gate, a forgotten door that had been used by boys with fish hooks to reach the river for joy and by women with baskets to dump water that had become unfit. They crowded it and came through one at a time, awkward and brave, and a man inside the wall who had always known he would die at his post met them with a cudgel he had taken from a cooper and broke a skull and wept because he remembered the face of the boy who had just fallen. Stannis wanted to be there with his sword and his breath on the cold air. He wanted, with an intensity that made his chest ache, to be the part of himself that did not think. But he stood on the raising deck of his ship because this was where he had to be to move pieces he had placed with care. "Send word to Seaworth," he said. "Tell him the door by the old Coopers is where I want the wedge to bite. He'll know the place." The boy who took that message had brown hair and a daughter in Storm's End whose curls had made Stannis' wife coo once. And Stannis remembered that even as he hated that he remembered it. His mind collected irrelevant facts because he refused to be softened by them. The boy ran, leaped to a small boat unknotting its line, and was gone into the odor of the river and the ferns that grew stubborn in the cracks of stone along it. Davos did know the place. It was where he had once stashed rotted lemons to throw to children because it was easier to be a good man in that season. He saw the boy in the boat before he saw the blade that sought the boy from the shadow under a moored barge, and he did the thing a man does without thinking, which is move his body into a space the blade might have liked to claim and offer it something else. His forearm sang, and a bright wet came. He took his knife in his left hand because a man should be ambidextrous in salvation, and he put it into a face that had not expected the conversation to go that way. He hauled the boy in by the collar and then spoke to him as if he were getting onions out of a cask. "Get your message into my ear and then you can bleed. Door by the cooper," the boy gasped. "The king says." He looked, even as he said it, as if someone had told him a story about the sea and then pushed him into it. Davos nodded as if it were the news he had wanted, because boys' lives were often 2 breaths long. "Cooper's door," Davos said to the fox-faced knight. "There. Not the gate. The gate wants to be the hero and will be the tomb for any man who lets it." He pushed a knot of men left as if he were the river and they the reed. He went with them because he was a man who did not give an order and then watch it from safety. The Sallyport was a mean thing, grudging, its threshold worn to a gentler language by feet that had not meant war. It had both welcoming and betrayal in it, like a proverb. "Up," Davos said, and men ducked because the lintel did not care for helmets. Inside, the world changed. Sounds became close. Light had an opinion. The corridor smelled of mold and of the socks that had once been hung here by men who had worked with barrel staves and sweat. A man with a club swung it at Davos's head and connected with the wood of the shield because Davos had placed it there out of long habit. And then someone behind Davos put a spear into the clubman's ribs, and that was the end of his story. Davos stepped over him because men had always been steps in other men's staircases in cities. They came up into the gatehouse, and for 3 heartbeats, there was surprise on both sides, and then there was nothing but the very old work. Tyrion turned, saw a face he had never seen before, and in it he saw every man he had thought about when calculating. He shouted for Sandor, then shouted for anyone who could be Sandor, and then was pressed against the wall by the press of men who all wanted the same 2 paces of stone. The room became a churn of breath and leather and metal and voices saying things that were not words. Davos did not seek a duel. He sought inches. He hooked his foot behind an opponent's ankle and sent the man down because a man on the ground is a question to his fellows. He blocked with his shield because a shield is a friend who tells you the truth. "I am here. They are there." He shouted to someone to bar one door and not the other, and the someone did not hear him, and then another someone did. The fox-faced knight laughed because fighting made him happy in a way Davos distrusted. A guard captain everyone had thought a fool revealed himself to be stubborn as a cat. He refused to die on the schedule others had for him. He spat blood and grinned with it in his teeth and rose again like a bad habit. He broke a man's nose with the butt of his spear and then went down with a sigh that sounded like resignation to some tangible domestic fate. Tyrion had the particular experience of seeing a man he would later recognize only by his smell coming at him with a knife and realizing that the knife was both too long for the space and too eager for the work. He stepped to the side, not gracefully but with the commitment of one who has been knocked down in crowded rooms before. He hit the man with the iron tip of his pike, low, and then again higher when the first touch did not persuade. He hated that move and loved it and would confess neither. Sandor appeared then as if he had stepped out of the wall, his shoulder bruising Tyrion back into safety. "Move, little lord," he barked, his tone all business and void of the affection that sometimes crawled into his voice like a flea. Davos found himself, for a second, facing a man with a small beard and clever eyes, and in those eyes was calculation so very like his own that he felt a strange kinship even as his sword rose. "Yield the room," Davos said, because he sometimes liked to test words even when the test was absurd. "I yield nothing," Tyrion snapped, and then, because it was a different kind of absurdity, he said, "But I can be persuaded if you tell me how long your king intends to bleed us." "Long enough to clean the wound," Davos said, with a regent's stubbornness and no humor at all in it. Then a blow from the side forced him to turn, and the moment of talk ended in the usual punctuation. The door to the gatehouse's inner stair gave with a crack as men with pry bars made new engineering, and someone threw in a stool as if it were a grenade. It went off in the way such things do, men tripping and cursing and the air changing with the motion. Something like calm descended then, not because the fight was over but because its terms were understood. It had been a confusion. It became a siege inside a shell. Men set their feet and set their jaws and learned the place under their hands as if it were a lover. The bell outside ran itself to exhaustion, then was taken up by another bell in a different tower, its voice deeper. The river continued to speak, indifferent as the fact of water. The sky got lighter in a way that made the faces in the room uglier or more honest. It depended. Stannis, on fury, watched the color inside the day with a soldier's acceptance. The morning was cold. The city would be cold in its heart. He felt the desire to move like an itch under his skin. "Prepare the boarding parties for the inner quay," he said. "We'll pour our weight on them until they do the thing we want out of boredom with their own resistance." "Your Grace," said a knight whose brother had died at Dragonstone and who wore the grief like a knife in his belt. "If we open the gate, we won't open it," Stannis said. "We will have it open itself in a bid to breathe. That is different." The knight looked as if he had heard a proverb and wanted to argue with it, then bowed because this was not an hour for philosophy. Stannis looked to the woman and found, not for the first time, that she was looking at him not as a man but as a node through which something passed. It made him angry. It made him accurate. "Do you see it?" he asked. "I see you, my king," she said. "And I see the men in that room, and I see the boy with the scar and the one with the ale breath, and I see the dwarf with the dangerous kindness in him, and I see your hand in all of it as surely as if you had placed men like stones on a board. But what I see most is a door that remembers the day it was cut and wants to be something else." He grunted. It was a compliment of the sort he could accept because it touched the work and not the man. "Very well," he said to the world and to himself, and to the god he would not speak to but could not help making space for. "Let us see if the door is ready." At the mud gate, the beam that had been jammed between leaf and wall slipped a finger's width, and in that gesture was the whole morning's progress. Men lifted, pushed, screamed, forgot they were men and became brutes, remembered again and went on. A lever broke. Another was found. Rope burned palms and left blank letters where life would write later. Davos saw, through sweat and smoke, the boy he had pulled from the boat take a blow on the shoulder that should have crushed a man and instead made him kneel and then rise, his mouth a straight line. He thought, wildly and with an odd joy, that he had learned to love new things even now. Tyrion's hair stuck to his head. He tasted iron and somebody's spit. He saw, through the frame of a doorway, a slice of river and the slant of a ship's sail, and he had a vision, absurd and absolute, of himself as the kind of man who would take a boat and row away. He almost laughed at it. He held his pike like a man holding a thought he dared not let go. "Hold the left," he shouted because it sounded like a thing someone in command should say. "Hold the left or we're undone." Sandor obeyed because men like him do not obey men. They obey moments. He set his shoulder to a crate that had been pressed into service as a bulwark and thought, with dull irritation, of the way fire took the mind and twisted it. There was no fire here that was not in men's eyes. He preferred this. He drove his sword into a man's thigh and wrenched it free, and the man went down and took 2 others with him, and Sandor replaced the crate when some fool thought it was an invitation to move. He looked, then, at the small man whose mouth made orders, and a small, reluctant respect crept into him like a splinter he would worry later. Streets beyond the gatehouse woke with noises that had nothing to do with war and everything to do with humans. A woman shrieked because her pig had bolted. 2 boys chased a dog that had stolen a loaf and laughed even in their hunger. A man sold hot wine to men who never drank it but held the cups because the heat made their fingers feel like they still belonged to them. Someone sang, badly, a little of a song about a king who had lost his wife to a miller. The song had more appetite than malice in it and told you what the city thought of kings. Stannis felt something in the air loosen. He heard, not with ears, but with whatever instrument measure shifts of human will. A rope give way inside a room he had never entered. He nodded to the flagman because it was time to be the river. "Now," he said, and the flag swung, and the horn answered, and boats that had pretended to be quiet leaped into noise. Oars struck water and splashed in unanimity, the only music Stannis enjoyed. Men in lighter armor, men he liked for their lack of ornament, took the inner quay like men arriving at their own table. They climbed ladders and did not wait for welcome. The city, enraged at this presumption, tried to knock them back with pots and with curses and with the sudden irresistible moralizing of men who have had something stolen abruptly, even when they did not know they owned it. It liked them all equally. Inside the gatehouse, the wedge that had been a rumor became a fact. The door shivered. A board went. Another. A hinge screamed. It sounded like a woman, which made me flinch. And then the leaf moved the way a stubborn relative rises from a chair. With complaint, with disbelief, with inevitability. Air rushed in. It smelled of river, of fish, of men with their hair unwashed and their hearts in their mouths. Tyrion grabbed at the beam and found himself beside Davos without any plan to be, their hands on the same burden. They heaved. The door moved another inch. Men on both sides forgot to hate for a second because the weight asked more of them than their dislike could spare. It would have taken less to break men who had been better fed. But there was something about hunger that made the body store in it a willingness to continue. The leaf gave another 2 inches, and then there was a space through which a man could move if he was small or determined. Small suited Tyrion. Determined suited Davos. They stared at each other like 2 men who had woken in the wrong beds and then climbed through. The room's pressure changed. Sound altered. Time for a foolish breath seemed to skip. Davos found himself in the mouth of the city with the day, and it was like a lullaby he had heard as a boy turned into a drumbeat. He stepped aside to let men flood past because a leader sometimes does the menial, and a lord sometimes forgets to. He looked up at the wall, and the sight of it from this angle made him feel a primitive triumph he had not expected. It is a terrible thing to be outside looking in. It is a different terrible thing to be inside looking out. Tyrion did not follow him through the gap. He knew better than to be swallowed by the thing he had been trying to chew. He turned, instead, and sought the lever and the brace and the pulley, and he found in those little devices a momentary peace. He had always loved the way mechanics reduced men to forces and angles. He barked orders that were numbers in disguise. He had a workman's joy when something heavy moved because he told it to. He would have liked King's Landing better if it had been made only of such pieces. "The king," said someone with an urgency that belonged somewhere else. "Where is the king?" "Safe," Tyrion snarled automatically. It was a lie told for utility. "And if he is not, he will be soon, if you remain where you are and act like a man worth saving." He stepped to the parapet then and looked down at the river with the new sight the gap allowed, and he saw the ships whose names he did not know as if they were cattle in a field where he had spent his childhood. He saw Stannis' flag. He saw the line of archers along the near bank shifting to accommodate the presence below. He saw firepots being lifted, ordinary fire, thank all the gods he had vowed not to believe in and sometimes did. He saw, above all, that they were early and that he had been wrong in his beautiful plan, and he found, to his surprise, that he did not resent that as much as he should. Improvisation warmed him. He felt, in his chest, something like a laugh, and he held it down because there was no time. On the ships, sailors sang in sudden bursts to keep time. Not beautiful songs, but useful ones. On the wall, a man cried out a prayer to a god whose name he had never used for anything but cursing, and was astonished when the prayer sounded like his own voice. In the streets, women pulled their children back by sleeves, hard and affectionate. In the keep, Cersei drank and watched the day being made by men and thought, with a bitterness that was bracing, that she would have to unmake it later to have her peace. In the sept, Sansa whispered to the mother the names of men she did not know and felt a pulsing in her throat that she wished was a psalm and knew was not. In the dark places under the Guildhall, Haelene adjusted a valve and felt, like a cook finding a sauce's balance, that this was almost what he had meant. And on Fury, Stannis Baratheon stood and watched the gate's leaf tremble and thought of no gods and no women and no songs. He thought of the promise he had made to himself at a table with bread on it and the smell of old ink in the air to make the world less of an insult to him. The day had not yet picked its hero. The river did what rivers do and offered its indifference as a platform. The city, affronted and curious, stepped to the edge of its own story. The first carts rolled aside, the first barricades slid back, and men began to learn the names of streets by the cost of crossing them. Davos, moving with a line toward Fishmonger's Square, felt the city's stones under his boots like old bones, and his body, unhelpfully, remembered a night when he had run these ways with a sack over his back and his heart in his mouth, and he had thought then that justice was a door with a latch that could be lifted by a cleverer hand. He knew better now, but he still reached for latches. A youth in a brown jerkin stepped into the way, a baker by the flour on his cuffs, a knife in his hand that had been meant for bread. "Who are you?" the youth demanded, voice breaking like a dropped plate. "Men come to move a stone," Davos said, not unkindly, and he stepped around the boy because this was not their quarrel. He could feel the pressure of the city pushing back and wondered, briefly, if Stannis' certainty would find a purchase in these narrow, crooked arteries. At the wall behind, Sandor wiped his blade with a square of cloth cut from a flag that had not meant anything even before he cut it, and he looked once more toward the river as if it might suddenly decide to betray them and become fire. He shook his head, disgusted with the superstition even as it clung to him. He could feel the morning's weight piling in his shoulders and knees, the ledger of violence that the day would ask him to balance. He rolled his neck and made his joints crack and smiled without humor because this, if nothing else, he knew how to do. The little lord turned and met his eye and saw, for a second, the man behind the burned skin, and inclined his head. In an acknowledgement that made Sandor feel both seen and tricked, he growled to hide whatever else tried to grow in him. Tyrion let his eyes go, then, to the quarter beyond the gate and watched a woman hang laundry on a line, because she had chosen to do that very foolishness in a war, and the sight steadied him. He had always loved the everyday. It had a courage that heroes did not. He turned and set about making the gate a thing that would open and close by his command, and he kept a corner of his mind for the thought that if they lived through the day, he would have to think of what it meant to have let the door open and invited a different king into his city. On fury, Stannis lifted his hand, palm down, and the movement steadied the men who watched him with the kind of faith that made him uneasy. He did not want their belief, he wanted their competence. He looked not at the city but into it, at the little changes that marked success. The shift of a line, the way a guard fought now for a foot of ground rather than for an idea. He saw, in the near distance, a girl on a balcony watching with a face that would have been pretty if it had had any choice but to be frightened. He looked away from her because he did not like being the cause of fear. He took in a long breath and let it out. "Advance," he said. If anyone had been a god that morning, they would have been the river or the stone. Men, in their multitude, moved at the edges of those two. Decisions were made, to run, to stand, to beg, to fight, to lie, to tell the truth. A traitor let Stannis' men pass through his doorway because he had calculated that his door was cheaper than his life and not calculated for the possibility of a later captain who would mark the door and come back. A child, delighted to be awakened, peered through her fingers at armored men and remembered only years later that their boots had made the most interesting sounds. A singer tried to turn the morning into a ballad and found that words failed when swords rose. He made note to return to it if he lived, and that note resided, uselessly, in the space inside his ribs where breath should have been for a while. By the hour when the sun was fully on the upper edge of the eastern rooftops, the mud gate was no longer the whole of it. The fight had bled into the city. Markets whose stalls had been raised and lowered with the sun without fail either lay smashed or stood stubbornly intact, because the universe enjoyed its jokes. A group of Storm's End men came upon the crooked yard where the washerwomen soaked sheets, and one of them, struck by the incongruity of the white linen and the mud on his boots, stood very still and then, embarrassed by his pause, roared and crashed on. A gold cloak who had thought himself a coward discovered that he loved standing at a corner and not letting men pass. It was a revelation, and he thought to tell his wife later. He did not have to worry about how she would take it. A stray cur bit a knight and ran away with a piece of leather. It was the best morning of the dog's life. At the sept, Sansa finished her prayer and rose when the septa told her to, and her knees were stiff, and she found that a small, foolish anger at the ache steadied her more than the words had. She walked to a window far from the altar and looked out through the glass, wavy and imperfect, and saw men like ants on bread. She wrapped her arms around herself because the gesture had worked when she was small. She thought, of her own accord without any instruction, of the men out there as sons and brothers and not as parts of a story, and in that thought there was a bravery an old soldier might have envied without recognizing it. Tyrion, finally, turned from the gate to the city and set off down the stair with Sandor, because you cannot command from a room for long without being turned into a man who deserves a desk and a bowl of ink. He felt, with each step, the jolt of what the day would require, and he welcomed it because he had learned that the body's misery sometimes sweetened thought. He began to plan the new plan, the one you always have to have when the first one has the temerity to meet the world. He found himself smiling and then made his mouth stop, because men do not love a commander who grins at them in the morning without very good reason. Davos led a handful down fishmongers and into a lane that would take them across to the wine harbor, where wealthy men kept their boats polished and their consciences like corks. He imagined taking those clean-kept decks underfoot and felt, in his bones, the old pleasure of stepping where he was not wanted. He kept a part of his mind for Mathos, a thread running back down the street to the boy's earnest expression, and tugged at it occasionally without looking, to feel that it was still there. He would not resolve the tug today. He would, if the gods and men allowed, count it later and add it to his ledger on a page that did not yet exist. Above them all, the season shifted. A wind dropped for the briefest breath and then took on a new idea. Smoke climbed and then changed its mind. The city had woken, truly now, and once awake, it remembered things men had tried to teach it. Where to hide, when to charge, which alley becomes a maze if you are not born in it. It began to assert itself not as a victim, but as a kind of animal with many heads and appetites. It swallowed some of Stannis's men and spat others back out. It tried, in small ways, to make peace with the idea of a different master, the way a cat will sit in the lap that is available and purr for warmth and not allegiance. It had, after all, survived many men and would survive more. Stannis watched his force shape itself and thought, briefly, of his brother on a field where summer had turned to stories, and he put the thought away with the practiced move of a man tidying his desk. If the city was an animal, he would be the man who broke it to harness. Ash. He did not like this metaphor in himself. He preferred law. He preferred words on paper and seals and men who understood that ink is stronger than blood. But the world had presented him with this lesson, and he would not be unready for the exam. He raised his hand again, and the ships moved, and the horns called, and the stamp of feet changed as men learned the day anew. The wild green fire that had haunted dreams did not come that morning to turn the river into a sermon. In its absence, other shapes grew large. The steadiness of men who did not want to be heroes, the choice of a boy to bar a door and bar it again, the sound of a city reconsidering its loyalties in 1,000 kitchens. The chain, unused and coiled, waited in its pit like a snake dreaming of a future meal and disappointed in the present. The gloom of the godswood inside the Red Keep stood, small and stubborn, in the face of a day made entirely of men's hands. The sky, with the cruelty of beauty, became a bright, hard blue by mid-morning and made armor shine and blood look almost decorative before dust and dirt democratized everything. And so the morning lengthened into itself, more work than myth, more inches than miles. The kind of day that leaves its marks not on tapestries but on shoulders and on the places where a man's fingers bend. The gate, cracked and braced, would open wider before it closed again. The city would be entered and contested. Names would be learned. The idea of a king would be measured against the shape of his hand on a sword and the sound of his voice in a hall that had believed itself married to another. If there were omens, they were small and human. A blackbird that landed on a flagpole and refused to move those stones were thrown. A girl who tripped and skinned her knee and burst into tears in the middle of a street where men stepped around her with a courtesy no one would have predicted. A fish jumping in the river at the exact moment an arrow struck water in the same place, turning the fish's leap into an impossible story for a boy to tell later. Stannis, looking toward the city's heart, felt the pull again, the thing that was not destiny, not prophecy, but the stubborn alignment of a man and his self-imposed task. He hated prophecy, and he mistrusted men who loved it. He believed in the line between a thing done and a thing not done. The wildfires of men's mouths would not decide this for him. The gates of a city would. He touched the pommel of his sword with a small, unconscious caress, as if the iron might take his meaning and forgive him for what he had to ask of it. He did not love the sword. He loved the work it made possible. On the wall, Tyrion's heart beat with that particular rhythm that comes when the body has accepted violent labor as its fate. It was almost pleasant, like a drum in a good band. He thought, unaccountably, of a book he had been read as a child about a girl who planted a seed and watered it and waited. He understood, perhaps for the first time, what the waiting had meant. He had planted plans and lies and coins, and now he would see what sprouted in a soil much stonier than any pot in a nursery. He grinned despite himself and then shouted at a man who had chosen the wrong street to defend by an inch. He hustled him to the right place with a hand on the man's back like a stern father. He could be useful. He clung to that with a fierceness that would have surprised him if he had had time to look at himself. Davos moved farther in, finding not lines but knots, points where men stuck, and he untied them or cut them and moved on. He thought of Matthias behind him at odd moments and of his other sons at sea with nets, their hands raw, their laughter coarse and good, and he wondered if this was the right sort of bread to feed a life. He had no choice but to think yes. He put that yes into the swing of his arm and the decision to push men through a courtyard instead of along a street because the courtyard had a well, and wells are friends in all weather. Melisandre stood and watched and did nothing a man could name. Her eyes, if anyone had looked, were like coals with gusts in them. She said no words and made no signs with her hands. She said later, to herself, she had said everything already. She saw possibilities like threads, read in all their versions, and she smiled once. Not out of happiness, but out of recognition. She loved men's work on days like this. It justified her faith without asking her to prove it. She wanted, as she often wanted, to be inside Stannis' head to see whether the fires burned brighter there than in other men. She contented herself with his profile and the bunched muscle in his jaw. By noon, the city would be something else. But now, at the last quarter of the morning, the balance could still be felt underfoot as a living thing shifting its weight from one leg to the other. Dogs and boys knew it before captains did. Women at windows with their hair unbound knew it before priests. The river, having been spared a miracle, went on as a river. The air above it lay out on the day like a cloth on a table, ready to catch crumbs. A gull, late to its profession, wheeled as if it had found a new game, and men below, with their old lethal games, ignored it. And in a narrow stair behind the gatehouse, in a space that smelled of rust and urine, something small and animal moved. A rat perhaps, or a cat with one ear, and turned back because the path ahead had become busy with booted feet. It waited. It cleaned its face with a care that made a virtue of smallness. When the men had passed, it went on, its tail straight, its confidence entire, because this was its city too, and it would outlive them, all of them, if given the chance.